Every alien male turned her away, until one human made a dangerous proposal. The hall was already buzzing when I walked in, and I knew immediately I was the smallest thing in the room. Not the shortest, smallest. The way a single candle is small inside a cathedral. The conclave of bonding on Iveth Prime was not built for creatures like me. The ceilings were 40 feet high, the corridors wide enough to fit a transport shuttle, and the air smelled like something between burnt copper and rain. My translator chip hummed behind my ear, working overtime on 17 simultaneous languages. I had been briefed 3 times on what this place was. I had studied the files. None of it had prepared me for actually standing inside it. My name is Cale Morrow. I am 34 years old, born in Leeds, England, and I work as a xenodiplomat for the Earth Diplomatic Commission. My job title sounds impressive until you realize what it actually means. I go to places where humans have never been, I watch things happen, and I write very long reports about them. I do not intervene. I do not participate. I observe. That was the plan. The conclave of bonding happens once every 10 years on Iveth Prime, a planet in the Vethari system, about 60 light-years from Earth. It is not a market, though it looks like one. It is not a festival, though it sounds like one. It is the single most politically significant gathering in this part of the galaxy, because the bonds made here are not personal arrangements. They are alliances. When 2 individuals from different species formalize a bond at the conclave, their governments are bound by it. Trade agreements follow. Defense pacts follow. Peace, in many cases, follows. It had been running for 200 years before humanity ever found out it existed. I was here because Earth had received a formal invitation to observe for the first time. 1 human, 1 observer, no interference. My supervisor, a sharp woman named Carol Hatch, had looked me in the eye before I left and said, "Morrow, you are a camera with legs, nothing more." I had nodded. I had meant it. The hall itself was shaped like an open bowl, with tiers of seating rising around a wide central floor. Every tier was full. I counted 32 distinct species just from the section nearest to me, and I had not turned my head yet. The air was warm and thick, with the sound of translator fields overlapping, turning the ambient noise into a soft, humming blur of almost language. Light came from panels in the ceiling that shifted color slowly, running through a spectrum I did not fully understand, but that seemed to make the gathered beings around me settle into a kind of formal calm. I found my designated observer seat on the 3rd tier and sat down, opened my tablet, began taking notes. I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. Then I saw her. She was standing at the far edge of the central floor, and she was not doing anything dramatic. She was simply standing there, reading something from a flat silver card, and even from the 3rd tier I could see that every being in her immediate radius was aware of her. Not because she was performing awareness, because she simply had it, the way some people carry a kind of gravity that bends the room toward them without trying. She was Vethari. That much I could identify. Tall, silver-scaled in the way that looked less like armor and more like light had decided to organize itself into a person. The Vethari were one of the founding species of the conclave, and they moved with the specific kind of confidence that comes from having been important for a very long time. Her head was held at an angle that said she was listening to everything around her and had already assessed most of it. I pulled up my briefing files and cross-referenced. It took me 40 seconds. Sierra Vaughn, daughter of High Consul Varys, the most senior political figure in the Vethari government. She had attended the last 3 conclaves as a formal candidate for bonding. She had in 11 years refused 43 proposals, 43. From warlords, from heirs, from fleet admirals and planetary governors, from beings whose names carried the weight of centuries. She had said no to all of them. I was still reading the file when the first suitor of the day stepped into the formal circle. He was Kethur, which I knew meant he was from the outer systems near the Ven cluster, and he was enormous in the way that things built for physical dominance tend to be enormous. He wore battle chrome along his shoulders, which my file told me was the Kether equivalent of a military medal. He carried a lineage scroll that had to be at least 4 feet long. He walked to the center of the floor with absolute confidence and spoke his formal proposal in a voice that rattled the panels above my head. Sierra Vaughn listened. She stood completely still. She waited until he had finished every syllable of his formal address, and then she said 3 words in Vethari. My translator rendered it, "You are sufficient." She walked away. The suitor stood in the circle, looking as though the floor had moved beneath him. I looked at my notes. I looked at the man beside me, a Doran observer whose name I could not pronounce but who had been to 4 of these conclaves. I asked him quietly what sufficient meant in Vethari formal language. He made a sound that I eventually understood was the Doran equivalent of a wince. "It means," he said carefully, "that you would do fine for someone else." I wrote it down. The next 2 hours followed a similar pattern. Suitor after suitor entered the circle. Some were brief. Some were elaborate, with full ceremonial presentations involving music and projected genealogies, and what appeared to be live plants offered as symbolic gifts. One candidate arrived with an actual fleet display visible through the hall's upper windows, 7 ships moving in formation above the planet as a demonstration of what he brought to any alliance. Sierra Vaughn watched it for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said something in Vethari that my translator rendered as, "I have seen larger." She was not cruel about it. That was the thing I kept noticing. She was not dismissive or cold. She was precise. She listened to every proposal in full. She responded with care. She simply said no every time with the manner of someone who had a clear picture of what she was looking for and had not yet seen it. I was on my 7th page of notes when I became aware that someone was looking at me. I glanced up. Sierra Vaughn was looking directly at me from the edge of the floor. I did what any reasonable person does when a highly important political figure makes unexpected eye contact. I looked immediately back at my tablet. This did not help, because when I looked up again 30 seconds later, she was walking toward me. She stopped at the railing of the 3rd tier. My translator chip adjusted. She said in trade tongue, "What species are you?" The being sitting near me went quiet in a radius of about 10 feet. I said human, from a planet called Earth. We're, fairly new to the conclave. This is our first observation year. She looked at me with an expression I could not immediately classify. It was somewhere between curiosity and the careful attention of someone doing a calculation. She said, "I have not encountered humans before. Are you here as a candidate?" "No," I said. "I'm an observer, I just take notes." She considered this. "You take notes," she repeated. "Yes. About us. About the conclave, the cultural and diplomatic significance of the bonding process. It is genuinely fascinating from an anthropological standpoint." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but the early architecture of one. "You find it fascinating," she said. "The political implications alone are remarkable," I said, and then realized I was probably talking too much because that is a thing I do under pressure. "Sorry, I'm Kale Morrow." "Sierra Vaughn," she said, as though I might not know. I absolutely already knew. She looked at me for another moment, then looked back at the central floor where the next suitor was preparing his entrance. She said, "What do your notes say about me so far?" I looked at my tablet. My latest entry read, "She said I have seen larger," and walked away, and the suitor looked like he was going to need a moment. I angled the screen slightly. "Diplomatic observations," I said. "Confidential." She made a sound that might have been amusement. Then she turned and walked back to her position on the floor, and the room around me exhaled. I sat there for a moment with my tablet in my hands. Then I wrote at the bottom of the page, "This is going to be a very interesting report." I did not know yet how right I was. That evening, in the observer quarters on the second level. I was reviewing the day's recordings when Carol Hatch contacted me on the comm. She was 3 systems away, and she sounded exactly like a person who had just received a report summary that contained details she had not expected. "Morrow," she said, "the daily summary mentioned that the Vethari candidate spoke to you directly." "Briefly," I said. "That has not happened with any other observer." "I noticed that." There was a pause. "Why do you think it happened?" I thought about Sierra Vaughn's expression when I said I was not a candidate. The way she had looked at me, the way you look at something you have not been able to name yet. I said, "I think she was curious." She said she had never encountered a human before. "Keep it professional, Morrow." "Always." Another pause. Then, in a different tone, the tone Carol used when she was telling me something that was not officially in the briefing. "The conclave officials issued a private notice tonight. If Sierra Vaughn does not formalize a bond before the closing ceremony, 3 systems that were counting on the Vethari alliance are going to start looking at other options. Military options. The political situation is more fragile than the public schedule suggests." I was quiet for a moment. "How fragile?" 3 fleet commanders arrived in orbit this afternoon," Carol said. "Unofficial, but not subtle." I looked out the window of my quarters at the sky above Iveth Prime. I could see the lights of ships up there if I looked at the right angle, moving slowly, patient. "I'm just an observer," I said. "Yes," Carol said, "you are." She disconnected. I sat for a long time in the quiet of the room, with the sound of 3 moons rising outside and the weight of 43 refusals, and 3 warships pressing on the air above a planet I had arrived on 20 hours ago. I was just supposed to take notes. I kept telling myself that. The second morning of the conclave began with a sound I had never heard before in my life, the formal announcement chime of Iveth Prime's bonding hall, which apparently involved actual resonant crystal plates the size of doors being struck simultaneously at 7 different points around the building. The sound went through the floor, through the walls, through my chest. It was not unpleasant. It was simply enormous, in the way that reminded you the beings who built this place were not thinking about someone my size when they designed it. I was at my observer post 12 minutes before the hall opened. I had my tablet, my field recorder, a second field recorder as backup, and a cup of something the Iveth catering system had produced when I asked for coffee. It was not coffee. It was a dark liquid that tasted like coffee had attempted to describe itself to a completely different kind of plant. I drank it anyway. The morning session opened with 3 proposals, all from candidates I had not seen the day before. The first was brief and was declined quietly. The second was elaborate and was declined politely. The third was from a being called Drell Voss, from the Shen Collective, who arrived with a formal gift of what my translator described as a cartographic legacy, which turned out to be a complete star map of every system his family had explored across 9 generations, encoded into a physical object about the size of a large book, made from a material that apparently took 40 years to produce. It was extraordinary. Half the hall leaned forward. I leaned forward. Sierra Vaughn held it. She turned it over in her hands. She looked at it for a long time. Then she handed it back, carefully, with both hands, in a gesture that my cultural file flagged as the Vethari sign for sincere respect. "This belongs to your lineage," she said. "I would not take it from that story." Drell Voss stood in the circle looking not humiliated, but genuinely uncertain, as though she had said something he had not expected and needed time to understand it. The hall was quiet. I had written in my notes, she did not want the gift, she wanted the thought behind it to stay where it belonged. I looked at that sentence for a moment, then I looked at Sierra Vaughn. She was watching me again. I had noticed by now that she watched the space of the hall the way experienced diplomats watch a room, constantly, evenly, without making it obvious. but she had looked at my section of the third tier at least 7 times since the morning session started. I was not the most interesting thing in the room by any reasonable measure. I was the only human in a building full of beings from 12-star systems. I was small, I was sitting quietly, I was taking notes. There was a delegation from the Marin Shoal 3 rows down from me, whose translator field was producing music every time they conferred with each other. I should not have been notable. I decided I was probably imagining it. Then the midday break came, and Sierra Vaughn walked directly to the third tier. She sat down 2 seats away from me. The beings immediately around us made very careful decisions about where to look that were not at us. Sierra Vaughn folded her hands and said, without preamble, "Tell me why you find this fascinating." "The conclave," I said. "The bonding process," she said. "You wrote something down each time, not just observations, you were thinking." I glanced at my tablet. "You can see my tablet from the floor." "I can see when someone's expression changes while they write," she said. "You are not difficult to read." That was both a compliment and a mild warning, and I understood it as both. I said, "I find it interesting because the proposals are all technically correct. They all follow the tradition. They offer the things that are supposed to matter. And you keep saying no, so clearly something is missing, and I've been trying to work out what." She was quiet for a moment. "And have you?" "I have a theory," I said, "but I could be completely wrong. I've been on this planet for 31 hours. "Tell me your theory." "They're all offering you things you already have," I said. "Status, strength, resources, security. You don't need any of those things. You are the daughter of the High Consul. You have all of that already. They're not offering you something new. They're just offering more of what you already own." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was the specific kind of silence that means you have said something accurate that the other person was not expecting from you. "What would you offer that is different?" she asked. And her voice was careful in the way that careful voices are when a question is not casual. I held up both hands. "I'm not proposing anything," I said quickly. "I told you I'm an observer. I am here professionally. I'm just telling you what my notes say." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "What are humans like?" I blinked. "That's a broad question." "I have time." So I told her. I told her what I knew, which was everything, because when you grow up somewhere you carry it without realizing. I told her that humans had been alive for about 200,000 years on a planet with no natural advantages. No scales, no regeneration, no venom, no claws worth speaking of, no special senses. We were not the strongest animal on our own planet, and we were definitely not the fastest, and for a long stretch of our history, we had been prey as much as predator. We had survived entirely on 2 things: the ability to work together and the specific human gift of refusing to stop. I told her about the fact that humans will sometimes run after prey for hours, just walking and jogging, because we can regulate our body temperature in a way most animals cannot, and we simply outlast things. I told her about the fact that human bones, when broken, come back stronger at the break point. I told her that humans are the only species on Earth that cries for emotional reasons, which scientists still do not fully understand. I told her that we have sent objects out of our solar system on the off chance that someone somewhere might find them, not because it made practical sense, but because it felt important to try. She listened to all of it. She did not interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "That sounds like a species that has never been told what it cannot do." "We have been told constantly," I said. "We just have a complicated relationship with being told no." Something moved across her face. It was fast, but it was there. "I have a question," she said. "Sure." "Why do the humans laugh?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "The other day when I asked if you were a candidate, you laughed. It was a real sound, not a social noise. You were genuinely amused. Why?" I thought about it. Because the idea was surprising, I said. Because I'm nobody in that context. I don't have a lineage scroll or a fleet. I'm a person with a tablet and a job title. The idea of me standing in that circle was funny in the specific way that things are funny when they're both impossible and kind of appealing at the same time. She was very still. Both, she said. The impossible part and the appealing part, she said. I realized what I had just said. That was a figure of speech, I said, a way of describing why something is funny. I didn't mean. I know, she said, but her voice had changed very slightly, not softer exactly, more attentive. She stood up, the break was ending, the hall was filling again. Kale Morrow, she said, which was the first time she had used my full name. What do your notes say about the proposals today? I looked at my tablet. That everyone is still offering you what you already have. She nodded once and walked back to the floor. I sat there for a moment with the empty seat between us and the weight of that conversation settling around me. I added a note to my file. Subjects in long-term negotiation sometimes know exactly what they want and are simply waiting to see if anyone will figure it out without being told. This is, in diplomatic literature, called patience. It is also, in human literature, called something else entirely. I did not write down what the human literature called it. Some things are better kept in the unofficial record. That evening at the Observer briefing, I learned two things that mattered. The first was that the High Consul Varys had issued a private statement to conclave officials asking all non-bonding observers to limit informal contact with formal candidates. The statement did not name me. It did not need to. The second thing I learned came from Nina Draper, the Earth Commission's secondary contact on Iveth Prime, who messaged me during dinner and told me in her calm, no unnecessary words way that she had been reviewing the political situation and the fleet movements in orbit, and that things were moving faster than the official schedule suggested. She said, "This conclave closes in 5 days. Whatever happens in those 5 days is going to matter for a long time." I read her message twice. Then I looked at my plate, which contained food I could actually identify for once, because the catering staff had gotten a request from the Earth Commission and made something approximating a grain bowl. I ate my grain bowl. I thought about Siravan saying both, and then saying I know. I thought about 43 proposals, and 3 warships in orbit in 5 days. I was just an observer. I kept saying that. I was beginning to suspect I was lying to myself. The third morning I arrived early again. I had not slept well, not because anything was wrong, but because my mind had done the thing it does when a problem it was not assigned is sitting in its peripheral vision. It had kept turning toward it in the dark, examining it from different angles, putting pieces together that I had not asked it to put together. The conclave floor was quieter at this hour. A few attendants moving between the seating tiers, adjusting the crystal light panels. One of the suitors from yesterday reviewing what looked like notes of his own near the lower tier. I found my seat and opened my tablet and tried to focus on the diplomatic analysis I was supposed to be writing. I had written 4 sentences when Siravan appeared at the edge of the central floor, 2 hours before the session was scheduled to begin. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the floor itself, at the formal circle marked there in the old Vethari way, a line of inlaid material that my briefing file said was 300 years old and had been part of the conclave since its first gathering. She was standing at the edge of it, not inside it, just looking at it the way you look at something that has a long history you are personally tangled up in. I watched her for a moment, then I did something I had not planned. I walked down to the floor. There were no officials present at this hour, no ceremonial guards. The only other person in the immediate space was an Iveth attendant far across the room who was doing something with a light panel and paying no attention to us. I walked across the empty floor and stopped about 10 feet from Siravan, because 10 feet seemed like a respectful distance. She did not look surprised. She said without turning, "You are not supposed to be on the floor. Observers are restricted to the tiers during sessions," I said. "The session does not start for 2 hours." She turned her head slightly. "You checked." I also checked whether the rule applied to the floor area or the full hall. It applies to the floor during sessions. Outside session hours, the floor is technically open access for conclave participants. Observers are technically conclave participants. I paused. I looked it up for completely professional reasons. She turned fully to face me. Her expression was unreadable in the way that very controlled faces are unreadable, but her eyes were doing something more than her face was. "What professional reasons?" she said. "I wanted to talk to you," I said, without a railing between us and without the break being limited to 12 minutes. A pause. Then, "My father requested that observers limit informal contact with candidates." "I know," I said. "You came anyway." "I noticed that you were here early too," I said, "before the restriction would apply." She was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression that was not quite a smile but was in the same family. "You are very literal," she said. "I'm told it is both a gift and a character flaw," I said, "depending on the situation." She looked at the circle on the floor. I looked at it too. Up close it was remarkable, the material something between metal and stone, the color of it shifting depending on the light angle. It looked like it had witnessed a great deal of history and was not impressed by any of it. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You have asked me many things already." "One more." She gestured slightly with one hand. "Permission." "In 43 proposals over 11 years," I said, "has anyone ever asked you what you actually want? Not what the alliance needs, not what the tradition calls for, what you want." The silence this time lasted longer than the others. "No," she said, "no one has asked that." "What do you want?" I said. She turned to look at me fully. It was a look that had weight to it, the weight of someone who does not get asked real questions very often and is deciding whether to give a real answer. "I want to be surprised," she said. "I want to look at someone and not be able to immediately calculate the entire length of what they are. I want someone to say something I have not already anticipated. I have been anticipated my entire life. Every approach, every strategy, every offer. I have read them all before they were spoken." She paused. "And I want someone who is afraid and does it anyway. That combination. I have never seen it." I stood there in the quiet of the empty hall, with that answer sitting between us. "Humans do that last part all the time," I said. "It's practically our main characteristic." She looked at me very directly. "I know," she said. "That is why I have been talking to you." The light panels above us shifted color, running through the early morning spectrum. Somewhere at the far end of the hall, the IVITH attendant finished with the panel and left the room. It was just us and the 300-year-old circle on the floor. I looked at the circle. I looked at her. I said, "What happens if the conclave closes and no bond is formalized?" Her expression did not change, but something in it settled, the way things settle when they have been held up for a long time and are allowed to rest. "War is a strong word," she said, "but it is not the wrong one." I nodded. I looked at the circle again. "I should go back to the tiers," I said. "Yes," she said. I walked back toward the tiers. At the edge of the floor I stopped and turned. "Sierra Vaughn." She looked at me. "I don't have a lineage scroll," I said, "or a fleet. I have a very detailed knowledge of alien bonding traditions and a tablet full of notes and about 80 years left on my biological clock, which I understand is an embarrassingly short time frame by your standards. But I asked you what you actually want without calculating anything first. I want you to remember that, whatever happens." She held my gaze for a moment. "I will remember that," she said. I went back to the third tier. I sat down. I opened my tablet. I did not write anything for a while. Carol Hatch called me at exactly 6 in the morning on the fourth day of the conclave. The call came with a priority flag, which meant she had been awake long enough to be angry before I had even opened my eyes. "Morrow," she said the moment I answered. I sat up. "I haven't done anything yet," I said, "technically." "The shuttle leaves at noon," she said. "The commission has reviewed the situation and determined that a human observer in close contact with a formal candidate during an active political crisis is an unacceptable diplomatic variable. You are to be on that shuttle." "Close contact is an exaggeration," I said. "We talked." "You talked 4 times in 3 days. You were on the floor outside session hours. The High Consul's office sent a formal note." I checked the rules. Observers can access the floor outside. "Morrow," her voice was flat, "shuttle noon." I was quiet. "This is not your situation to fix," Carol said, and her voice had shifted slightly, which was the closest Carol came to saying something that was not entirely professional. "Even if you could, even if you wanted to, it is not your place." "What if I'm not trying to fix anything?" I said. "What if I'm just telling the truth?" There was a pause. "What does that mean?" "She asked me once what humans are like," I said. I told her exactly what we are. No exaggeration, no strategy, no offer of a fleet or a lineage scroll, just the truth about where we come from and how we operate. And the way she listened to that was different from the way she listens to proposals. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then, "The shuttle leaves at noon. Your bags should be packed by 10. She disconnected. I put the comm down. I sat on the edge of the bed in my observer quarters and looked at the wall for a while. Outside, the 3 moons of Iveth Prime were still visible in the early sky, fading as the system star came up. The light was the specific quality of light that exists only in the very early morning on alien worlds, thin and clean and honest, the kind of light that makes everything look exactly as it is. I thought about what Carol had said. She was right, technically. It was not my situation. I was a camera with legs. I was supposed to observe and report and go home and write a document that would sit in a file somewhere and inform future diplomatic decisions, and that was genuinely valuable work, real work, the kind of work that mattered at a structural level even when it felt invisible. I thought about Sierra Vaughn standing at the edge of the circle at 7 in the morning, alone, looking at 300 years of history and what it had cost her. I thought about afraid and does it anyway. I packed my bag. Then I unpacked it again. I sat down at my desk and opened my tablet and looked at my notes. All of them. Every word from 4 days of observation. I had 38 pages of diplomatic analysis and cultural documentation and political context and careful, professional language. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote a single line that was not professional language at all. Then I closed the tablet and got dressed and went to the hall. The session was already underway when I arrived. I did not go to the 3rd tier. I went to the edge of the observer area near the floor-level barrier, and I stood there and watched. There were 2 suitors presenting that morning. Both were from species I had files on. Both were credible, politically significant, and entirely predictable. Sierra Vaughn listened to both with the same careful attention she gave everything. She declined both with precision. The second declination produced a response I had not seen before. The suitor did not leave the circle immediately. He spoke again, loudly, in his own language. My translator rendered it as a statement about the Vethari alliance being wasted on a candidate who lacked the judgment to recognize real value when it stood in front of her. The hall went tense. 2 conclave officials moved toward the circle. Sierra Vaughn said something very quietly in Vethari. My translator caught only part of it. The phrase that came through was something like, "I recognize exactly what is in front of me. That is the problem." The suitor left, the officials relaxed, the hall exhaled. I watched Sierra Vaughn turn from the circle. Her eyes swept the floor, the tiers, the space around her. They stopped when they found me, standing at the barrier where I was not supposed to be standing. She looked at me for a long moment. I looked back. She turned away. The next formal presentation was announced. The ceremony continued. At 10:45, I sent Carol Hatch a message. It said, "I am not on the shuttle. I understand the professional consequences. I will write a full accounting when I have something worth accounting for. Please do not reassign my position yet." Carol's reply came 4 minutes later. It was 3 words: "You are impossible." I took that as permission. At 11, I went and found Nina Draper in the Observer Support Office. She was a small, precise woman who had been working conclave logistics for 3 cycles and knew every rule and exception in the formal record. I asked her 6 questions. She answered all of them, slowly and carefully, with the expression of someone who knows exactly what the questions are pointing toward and is deciding whether to be complicit. After the 6th answer, she said, "Observers are not candidates." "I know," I said. "The formal circle requires a registered candidate status." "I know," I said. "There is, technically, an exception in the original conclave charter for a being who enters the circle without prior registration and states a formal intention in front of the full assembly. It has happened twice in 200 years. Both times it was considered irregular." "But it was allowed," I said. She looked at me for a long time. "It was allowed," she said. I thanked her and left. At 2 in the afternoon, the conclave assembly was in full session. The hall was at capacity. The 3 fleet commanders who had arrived in orbit 4 days ago were, according to the morning briefing, now present in the building as informal guests of the High Consul. They were seated in the upper tier. I did not look at them. I stood at the edge of the formal floor. My heart was doing something loud and unhelpful. I want to be clear about that. I was not calm. I was not performing courage. I was genuinely and thoroughly afraid, in the specific human way that means your brain is presenting you with every possible bad outcome at full volume while your legs carry you forward anyway. That is, I had told Sierra Vaughn, practically our main characteristic. A suitor finished his proposal. Sierra Vaughn declined, gently, with the phrase my translator had started to recognize: "You would serve well elsewhere." The suitor stepped out of the circle. I stepped in. The effect was immediate. The ambient noise of the hall, which was constant and layered and had been running underneath everything for 4 days, stopped. Not faded, stopped, as though someone had turned off the sound. Every set of eyes in that building found me. I was standing in the formal circle of the conclave of bonding on Iveth Prime, which I had no standing to enter, with no lineage scroll, no fleet, no house affiliation, no ceremonial offering, and no plan beyond what was already happening. A conclave official near the edge of the floor said, loudly, "This individual is not a registered candidate." "I know," I said. My translator broadcast it clearly across the hall. "I am invoking the unregistered entry clause in the original conclave charter, Article 7, subsection 4, the exception for a being who states formal intention before the full assembly." The official looked at his records. I waited. Everyone in the hall waited. The 3 fleet commanders in the upper tier were very still. The official looked up. "The exception is valid," he said, in a tone that communicated that he personally felt the exception was deeply inconvenient. I turned to face Sierra Vaughn. She was standing 15 feet away from me. Her expression was the most unreadable I had seen it, but her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was paying very close attention. I said in trade tongue, loud enough for the hall to hear, "My name is Cale Morrow. I am from Earth, which is a planet 60 light years from here that most of you have not heard of yet. I have no lineage scroll. I have no fleet. I do not have a political alliance to offer or a territory to contribute or a military history that takes up more than 1 page. I have approximately 80 years left on my biological clock, which I understand is a short time frame by most standards in this hall, and I intend to use them in a way that will probably produce more documentation problems for my government than I can currently anticipate. A sound moved through the hall, not quite a murmur, more like the auditory equivalent of everyone deciding whether to look at the person next to them. I am not going to tell you I am the strongest option in this room, I said. I am probably the least strategically significant candidate who has ever stood in this circle. I know that. I am telling you that because honesty is something humans do, even when it is inconvenient, and if I am going to stand here, I am going to stand here as exactly what I am. I looked at Sierra Vaughn, just at her. The hall and the fleet commanders and the official and the 43,000 years of tradition all fell to the edges of my awareness. You told me you want to be surprised, I said. You told me you want someone you cannot immediately calculate the entire length of. You want someone afraid who does it anyway. I paused. I am terrified right now. I want that on the record, and I am still standing here. That is who humans are. That is who I am. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, if none of that is worth the risk of being wrong about, I will walk out of this circle, write what is probably the most interesting diplomatic report in Earth Commission history, and spend the rest of my career telling everyone I ever meet that I once stood in the conclave of bonding and said exactly what I meant, and it was still not enough, which would honestly be a very human outcome. Silence. Sierra Vaughn looked at me. The entire hall looked at Sierra Vaughn. From the upper tier, I was aware of the High Consul getting to his feet. I did not look at him. Then Sierra Vaughn did something that 43 suitors across 11 years had never made her do. She laughed. It was not a social noise. It was not a formal acknowledgement. It was a real sound startled out of her, the kind of laugh that happens when something lands exactly where it was aimed and you were not braced for the impact. It lasted only 2 seconds, but it filled the hall in the way that real sounds do, the ones that no one is performing. The hall, if it was possible, went even more silent after it. Sierra Vaughn's expression settled back into composure, but her eyes were still doing that thing, that very attentive thing. She said, in a clear, formal voice, using the precise Vethari phrasing that my translator had learned to recognize as the language of official conclave proceedings. Under conclave tradition, I invoke the right of the 7-day consideration period. The official near the floor made a note. Accepted, he said, in the tone of a man who needed a very long rest. I stood in the circle for a moment longer. My heart was still doing the loud, unhelpful thing. My legs felt the specific way legs feel when they have carried you through something they were not sure about. I looked at Sierra Vaughn. She looked at me. I had not been rejected. I had not been accepted. I had been given 7 days. For a human, with our long tradition of doing impossible things in short time frames, 7 days is practically an eternity. I stepped out of the circle. Behind me, the hall erupted. The sound was still going when I reached the observer level. 3 different conclave officials were trying to intercept me at once. Nina Draper appeared from a side corridor, handed me a printed copy of Charter Article 7 subsection 4, said, "For your files," and disappeared again before I could thank her. 2 delegates from species I did not recognize stopped to look at me with expressions that my translator chips could not immediately categorize, and gave me phonetic sounds that might have been my name said in languages that had not been designed for it. Carol Hatch messaged me at exactly the moment I reached a quiet corner. "I have 17 calls waiting. Start talking." I leaned against the wall. My ribs felt fine. Everything felt fine, actually, in the specific way that things feel fine in the first few minutes after you have done something you cannot undo, before the full weight of the consequences arrives. That particular kind of fine has a short shelf life, and I knew it. I messaged Carol back. I invoked Charter Article 7. Nina Draper can confirm it was legal. I have a 7-day consideration period. I do not have a plan beyond that. Her reply came in 11 seconds. You never have a plan beyond that. That was accurate. The first consequence arrived that afternoon. His name was Rendar, and he was Kethur, which meant he was from the same culture as the battle-chrome suitor from day one, though he was younger and carried himself with the specific energy of someone who has been waiting for a reason to be offended. He found me in the corridor outside the observer dining area and told me, via translator, that I had entered the formal circle without honor qualifications, and that this was an insult to the Kethur candidates who had presented with full ceremonial standing. I said that I had used a legal charter exception. He said that legality and honor were not the same thing. I could not argue with that point actually. I agreed with him. He told me that under Kethur tradition, the only resolution for an insult of this kind was a formal challenge. I asked what a formal challenge involved. He described it. It involved, essentially, a structured physical contest with specific rules about when the challenged party was considered to have lost. I listened carefully. I asked 3 clarifying questions. He answered all 3 with the slightly surprised expression of someone who expected more resistance. Then I accepted. He looked even more surprised. You accept? Yes, I said. You're right that I did something irregular. If Kethur tradition requires this resolution, I respect that tradition. I paused. When? Tomorrow morning, he said, before the session. Agreed, I said. I need to understand one rule clearly. The challenge ends when the challenged party concedes, correct? It does not end before that. Correct, he said. Honor requires the concession be given voluntarily. I nodded. Good, I said. I need you to understand one thing about humans before tomorrow. He waited. We do not concede easily, I said. It is a cultural trait. I want to be honest with you about that so you are not confused by how long it takes. He stared at me. Then he said something in Kethur that my translator rendered as an expression of grudging respect, with a secondary note of personal concern about what he had agreed to. He left. I went to my quarters and spent 2 hours learning everything I could find about Kethur formal challenge tradition. By the time I was done, I had 4 pages of notes and a clearer picture of what tomorrow morning was going to feel like. I did not sleep particularly well, but I had not expected to. The challenge happened in a side chamber off the main hall, a space the conclave maintained specifically for formal resolution events. It was smaller than the bonding floor, with a lower ceiling, and the light panels ran at a flat white that left nowhere to hide anything. Rendar was already there when I arrived, with 2 witnesses from the Kethur delegation. I had Nina Draper as my witness, who had agreed with the same calm expression she used for everything, as though witnessing alien challenge events was a normal part of logistics management. I will not describe the challenge in detail because the specific details are not the point. The point is that it lasted 41 minutes and I did not concede. I want to be clear. I was not winning. I was not matching Rendar physically. He was larger and faster and trained in a tradition that I was reading about for the first time yesterday. What I had was the specific human ability to take damage and continue, not because I did not feel it, because feeling it did not translate into stopping. At the 38-minute mark, Rendar said something that my translator gave as, "Why are you still standing?" I said, "Because I haven't decided to stop yet." He looked at me for a long moment, then he looked at his witnesses, then he looked back at me. He said formally in Kethur, "This challenge is resolved, the honor question is closed." He did not explain why. Under Kethur tradition, as I had read, there is a category of resolution that happens not when one party loses, but when one party demonstrates a quality that the challenge was designed to test. The quality in this case, as near as I could understand from what Nina Draper quietly told me afterward, was something the Kether called presence under cost, the willingness to bear the weight of a consequence rather than step away from it. Rendar left the chamber without looking back. One of his witnesses on the way out paused and said something to me in Kether. The translator rendered it as, "You are strange. This is a compliment." I sat down on the floor because my legs had decided they were done being professional about it. Nina Draper handed me a medical kit from her bag. "I suspected you would need this," she said. "You could have warned me," I said. "You would have done it anyway," she said. She was right. The second challenge came the following morning. This one was from a Shen collective candidate named Veloras, whose tradition apparently had a different structure, more about formal debate and public statement, but which still required physical presence under specific conditions. I went through another 3 hours of file reading, came to a different kind of understanding of the rules, and accepted that challenge too. This one was, in some ways, harder, not physically, but the Shen collective's tradition required that the challenged party stand in open chamber and hear a formal account of every reason they were considered unworthy, for 20 minutes, without responding. I stood there and listened to a very thorough accounting of everything I lacked. No lineage, no alliance weight, no biological compatibility data on record, 80 years of lifespan against species that counted centuries, the political irrelevance of Earth at the current stage of galactic relations, the presumption of entering a ceremony built on traditions older than my entire civilization. Most of it was accurate. I stood there and heard it, and I did not leave, and at the end of the 20 minutes Velora stopped speaking and looked at me, and I said, "Is that everything?" He said yes. I said, "Thank you for being honest." I agreed with most of it. The parts I disagreed with were the parts about irrelevance, because I think Earth is going to surprise quite a few people in the next 100 years, but that is a matter of opinion. There was a pause. Velora said in trade tongue, "You are not angry." "No," I said. "You were honest. I asked for honesty yesterday in that circle. I can hardly be upset when someone else provides it." The challenge was resolved. The witnesses left. I found a quiet room and sat down and was quietly a mess for about 10 minutes, because that is the human way, feeling the full weight of something once you are alone and do not have to hold anything together. Then I stood up, washed my face, and went back to work. That evening, I received a message I had not expected. It came from the High Consul's office, not a formal summons, a personal request. Varys, High Consul of the Vethari, asked to meet with me privately at the 7th hour. I went. His office was on the upper level of the conclave complex, a room that felt like every important conversation that had ever happened in it had left something behind, a weight in the air that was not unpleasant but was impossible to ignore. He was taller than Sir Ivan and older in a way that showed not in his face exactly but in how still he was, the stillness of something that has seen a very long time pass and stopped being hurried by it. He offered me a seat. I took it. He did not threaten me. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to write this as the scene where the important father says back away from my daughter or face consequences. He did not do that. What he did was look at me for a long moment and then ask a single question, in the direct, quiet voice of someone who has spent a very long time saying things that mattered. He said, "What do you offer my daughter that 43 others could not?" I thought about the answer. I did not think for long, because I had been thinking about it for days without meaning to. I said, "I'm still in the circle when it gets difficult. I don't leave when the cost goes up. That's what I offer, not because I'm special, because that's what humans do, we stay." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She has not laughed in this building before." I did not say anything. "She has been here 3 times, he said. 43 proposals. I have watched her decline each one with perfect control because she is my daughter, and she was raised to hold everything carefully. She laughed in that hall in front of 3 fleet commanders and the full conclave assembly because of something a human with a tablet said in a circle he had no standing to enter. I still did not say anything. "I am not asking you to leave," he said. "I asked what you offer. You answered. I wanted to hear it from you, not from a report." I nodded. He looked at me for one more long moment. "Humans are young," he said. "Young and small and fast by the standards of this part of the galaxy. 80 years." He paused. "My daughter will live for 400. You understand what you are asking her to carry?" "Yes," I said, "I do." "And you are asking it anyway." "I am asking her to decide," I said. "It is her decision. I just wanted to make sure she had all the information." He sat back. Something in his posture shifted, very slightly, in the direction of something that was not resignation, and was not approval but was somewhere between them, the look of a being who has calculated something and found the result unexpected. "My daughter," he said, "is the most careful person I know. She does not make decisions quickly, but when she has decided, she does not change her mind." He paused. "I am telling you this so you understand the weight of the next 4 days." I understood. I thanked him. I left. In the corridor outside, I stood for a moment in the flat light of the conclave building and held the weight of everything he had said. 400 years, 80 for me against 400 for her. I had known the numbers. Knowing them and hearing them said out loud in a room built from 300 years of alliance and history were different things. I thought about it for a long time. Then I thought about Sierra Vaughn standing at the edge of the circle at 7 in the morning, alone, looking at something she had been standing next to for 11 years. I went back to the observer quarters. I wrote in my notes. The High Consul asked what I offered. I told him. He listened. He did not tell me to leave. In diplomatic terms, this is called a significant development. In human terms, I am calling it permission to keep going. 3 days left. I intended to use them. The 7th day arrived the way important days do. Quietly, like any other morning, with no signal that it was different except that everything was slightly sharper at the edges, the way the world gets when you know something is about to be decided. I was awake before the first chime. I had been awake for an hour, sitting at the desk in my quarters with a cup of the not-quite coffee and my tablet open to a page I had not been writing on, just thinking. Outside, the 3 moons of Iveth Prime were still in the sky, the last hour before the system's star came up and washed them out. They were the same moons I had watched 7 nights ago, when this was still a situation I could theoretically step away from. I could not step away from it anymore. I was not sure I wanted to. Carol Hatch had sent me a message the previous evening. It was longer than her messages usually were, which meant she had been thinking about it. It said that the Earth Commission had reviewed the situation and made a formal decision to wait for the outcome before determining consequences for my conduct, and that this was not the same thing as approval, and that she personally thought I was the most exasperating field officer she had ever worked with, and that she also thought what I had done in that circle was the most honest piece of diplomacy she had seen in 20 years in the Commission, and that those 2 things could both be true simultaneously, and that I should come back in one piece. I had read it 3 times. Nina Draper had stopped by my quarters the previous evening with the final schedule for the closing ceremony, which was today. The formal assembly would convene at midday. All consideration periods had to resolve by then. Sierra Vaughn would either give her formal response or she would not, and if she did not, the period would expire without resolution, and the conclave would close with no Vethari bond for the 3rd consecutive gathering, and the political machinery that had been tensing like a spring for 7 days would release in whatever direction it released. There were still ships in orbit, fewer than before, actually. 2 of the 3 fleet commanders had moved their vessels back to standard distance, which Nina Draper told me could mean either reduced tension or preparation, and she could not tell which. I got dressed, I went to the hall. The assembly was already filling by mid-morning, beings from 32 species taking their places with the specific manner of people who know that something is about to happen. The energy in the room was different from the first day. The first day had been formal and ceremonial and heavy with tradition. Today felt like the last page of something long. I went to the third tier, my observer seat. I sat down and opened my tablet and looked at 38 pages of notes and thought about the fact that the document I was supposed to be writing had become something very different from anything I had planned. At 11:40, Siravan entered the hall. She came through the main entrance in full, formal Vethari ceremonial presentation, which I had not seen before. The silver-scale formal wear of the Vethari governing line, the specific arrangement of her presence that marked her not just as a candidate, but as the daughter of the High Consul, the weight of everything her family and her species had built over 400 years visible in how she moved. The hall recognized her entrance and went quiet in the graduated way that large spaces go quiet, tier by tier, as attention moved toward her. She moved to the center of the floor. She stood in the formal position. She looked at the assembly. Then she looked at the third tier. She found me immediately. I did not know whether to stand or stay seated. I stayed seated, because I was not sure standing would mean anything except that I was nervous, which I already was, and which everyone in the room probably already knew. The formal announcement of the closing ceremony began. The conclave official recited the traditional opening. The names of the bonds formed this session, the acknowledgments to the host species. I heard it distantly, the way you hear things when your attention is somewhere else entirely. Then the official said, "The consideration period granted under Article 7 of the Conclave Charter expires at this hour. The candidate is called to provide her formal response." The hall was absolutely still. Sierra Vaughn stood in the center of the floor. She looked at the assembly for a moment. Then she began to speak in Vethari first, clearly and formally. My translator rendered it as she went. She said, "I have attended 3 conclaves. I have received 44 proposals. 43 of those proposals offered me things I could calculate: strength, status, alliance, wealth, history. All of these things were real and valuable and would have served the political interests of the Vethari well. I do not doubt the worth of any of the beings who made those offers." She paused. The 44th proposal offered me something I had never been offered before. It offered me honesty about limitation. It offered me the sight of someone afraid who was present anyway. It offered me a species I cannot calculate the full length of because humans are new and unpredictable and have no record long enough to contain them yet. Another pause. It offered me surprise. I was holding very still. She turned to face me directly. The hall turned with her, 32 species and 300 years of tradition, and the full political weight of Iveth Prime all looking at the third tier. "I accept," she said in trade tongue, clear and formal and final. The hall erupted. I am not going to pretend I had a dignified response to that. I sat in my observer seat for a moment with the sound of the hall around me and the weight of what had just been said landing in stages, the way large things land. First the fact, then the meaning of the fact, then the meaning of the meaning. My heart was doing the loud, unhelpful thing again. My eyes were doing something I was going to blame on the light panels later. Carol Hatch messaged me in the first 30 seconds. "You complete disaster. Congratulations." Nina Draper appeared at the end of my row and said, calmly, "You are going to need to go to the floor." I stood up. I straightened my jacket, which was the most dignity I had available. I walked down to the floor. The formal circle, the 300-year-old line in the floor. Sierra Vaughn was standing at the center of it. I walked to her. We stood facing each other, which felt both enormous and very simple, in the way things feel when you have arrived somewhere after a very long walk. She said quietly, "Not for the hall. You look like you were not completely certain I would say yes." "I was not completely certain," I said. "Good," she said. "Certainty would have been boring." I almost laughed. I managed to limit it to something that probably looked like a smile. The conclave official was speaking again, beginning the formal language of the bonding acknowledgement. The hall was still erupting around us, not with disapproval exactly, though some of that was in there, but with the specific chaos of 3 fleet commanders and 32 species, all recalculating their models at once. Because what had just happened was not just personal. The Vethari had just formalized a bond with a species that most of the galaxy had no military file on, no threat assessment, no known capabilities, no historical pattern to extrapolate from. In 43 years of human space travel, we had been cautious and careful, and had not yet done anything that made anyone take us seriously as a galactic force. We were, as of this moment, unknown. And there is nothing that produces more careful behavior in the powerful than the unknown. Sierra Vaughn said her formal acceptance again in full Vethari for the record. The official marked it. The hall continued its chaos. She looked at me. "I have 3 conditions." I blinked. "You negotiated conditions." "Of course I negotiated conditions. I am the daughter of the High Consul. I always negotiate." "I should have expected that. What are they?" "A formal cultural exchange between Earth and Iveth Prime, beginning within the year." "Done," I said. "Earth will fall over itself to agree to that." Second, human medical data, specifically longevity and cellular repair research, shared with the Vethari medical institutions. "That will take commission approval, but I do not anticipate a problem," I said. "Done." "Third," she said, and her expression shifted slightly to the one that was the early architecture of a smile. "You teach me to laugh the way humans laugh." I looked at her. "The real kind," she said, "not the social noise, the kind you made when I asked if you were a candidate." I thought about all the things that had happened in 7 days and how we had arrived here. I thought about a 300-year-old circle on the floor and 44 proposals, and afraid, and going anyway, and the specific kind of laughter that gets startled out of you when something lands exactly where it was aimed. "I can do that," I said. "Good," she said. The ceremony continued around us. Somewhere above, the fleet commanders were sending messages. Somewhere in the upper tier, the High Consul was watching his daughter with an expression I would only understand later when I saw it in the recording. A kind of settled satisfaction, the expression of a being who has been waiting for something to happen and has finally watched it happen, and is deciding to let it. Carol Hatch sent another message. "You have 17 diplomatic calls waiting when you land. Also, you owe me an enormous explanation." Nina Draper was taking notes on the other side of the floor, which I found genuinely comforting. Outside, through the high windows of the conclave hall, the moons of Iveth Prime were invisible now in the full light of the system star, but I knew they were still there. Same moons, different day. Sierra Vaughn said, "You are thinking very loudly." "Sorry," I said, "human habit." "What are you thinking?" I looked at her. I thought about Carol's message, about the 17 calls waiting, about the year of cultural exchange, the medical data agreements, the political weight of what had shifted in the last 12 minutes, about 80 years against 400, about everything ahead that was going to be complicated and difficult and genuinely uncertain. "I'm thinking," I said, "that this is the most interesting footnote I have ever put in a report." She looked at me for a moment. Then she made the sound, the real one, not the social noise, the startled, genuine, landing exactly where it was aimed sound. 2 seconds long, filling the hall. Around us, 32 species stopped and looked. I thought, that's a very good start. Somewhere behind the official's desk, the conclave record was being updated. The entry was simple, as historical records tend to be when they are recording something that will matter for a very long time. It noted the date, the conclave session, the species of the two parties, and the formal outcome. I saw a corner of the screen as I walked past, the species field read, Vethari and human. That was all. Not the detail of how it happened, not the 43 before it, not the 7 days or the 2 challenges or the conversation in the empty hall at 7 in the morning or the weight of the High Consul's question or the moment in the circle when fear and presence stood in the same body and the body stayed standing. Just the outcome. That felt right, actually. The record is where things are stored. The story is what happened to get there. I filed my report 3 weeks later when I was back on Earth. 37 pages. Every diplomatic detail, every political implication, every cultural note worth making. The section on the Vethari bonding tradition alone ran to 8 pages, and I am told it became required reading for the Commission's Xenocultural Training Program within 6 months. I marked 5 pages of the report as personal and classified them. Some things do not belong in the official record. They belong in the part of the memory that you carry without filing, the part that stays warm. The Cultural Exchange Program launched the following spring. Sierra Vaughn led the Vethari delegation. She arrived at Earth's diplomatic station on a Tuesday morning, stepped off the transit shuttle, looked at the sky above the station, which was an ordinary blue with ordinary clouds and a sun that was slightly smaller and warmer than Iveth Prime's, and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "It's smaller than I expected." I said, "The sky." "The planet," she said. I said, "Wait until you see what it does." She looked at me with that expression, the one that was the early architecture of something real. "I am waiting," she said. We walked into the building together. Outside, the clouds were moving the way Earth clouds move, slowly, without any particular intention, just the business of weather on a small planet with 200,000 years of unreasonable history, and absolutely no intention of being finished. That is who we are. We are afraid and we go anyway. We stay in the circle when it gets difficult. We laugh when something lands exactly where it was aimed. And sometimes, on a planet 60 light years from home, in a hall built by people who were not thinking about someone our size, we walk into a 300-year-old circle with nothing but honesty and a complicated relationship with being told no, and we change something. Not because we planned it, because we stayed.